Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp where more than 1 million people, mainly Jews, were murdered. People with families and friends. Ordinary people robbed of their future. Each had their own unique story of how they came to be at Auschwitz. Only a minority survived. And today, decades later, very few can explain what happened there as witness to its human terror. Kitty Hart Markson was 17 years old when she arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau in April 1943. Now she travels back one last time to answer the questions of a new generation.
My name is Kitty Hart Markson, and I'm a Holocaust survivor.
Designed as a factory of death, no one was intended to survive, let alone describe its inhumanity to a world not yet ready to listen.
No one wanted to know, no one wanted to hear what I had to say. But I made a commitment that the people don't want to hear, but I'm going to make sure that they will. I've been here many times, but I really wanted to come with 2 girls who were my age when I was here. I want to show them the struggle for survival.
What were your first impressions of the camp?
There was just the most incredible mud. And then we saw like a glow in the distance. And soon when we got there, we saw ghost-like figures with shaved heads, staggering in tattered clothes, with great big eyes, screaming in all languages and being beaten. And we thought, my God, is this what's going to happen to us?
I've known Kitty since I was born. I've known about her story since I was little and sort of grown up with the influence of it. What did you first see when you got off the train?
Alsatian dogs. They were barking, trying to get at us.
And I wanted to try and understand a bit better how she coped in these conditions and how she managed to survive for so long.
And we're walking into the women's camp now.
I met Kitty for the first time after the school talk she gave us, and I went up and asked some questions to her. And I'm just kind of nervous and excited because I want to see it from a different perspective that I may have seen it in class.
And you see these stumps? These are the chimneys of the wooden barracks.
What happens to you when you were in those formative years, age 13 to 16? It shapes you and your character for the whole of your life. Auschwitz is where my grandma feels she belongs, and it always calls her back.
Kitty Hart was one of the first survivors to tell her story. She gives us access to that experience with the power of her words. You have to treat what Kitty says almost like music. I hear what she says, and I also try to listen to what she has left unsaid.
You see this crossroad? The crossroad was the crossroad to life or death.
The very fact that Kitty was an eyewitness and can say, this is what I saw, actually ensures that it cannot be denied, that the intentionality of the perpetrators is clear, and that it's indisputable that what she saw is what happened.
And as you walked, you got stuck in this mud, and all these people were falling around in the mud.
You cannot stand there and simply say, this is okay. This should never have happened. It should never have existed. And as a human being thinking about the experience of others, you just realize this is no place for anybody to have ever been.
Just prior to invasion, my father decided we've got to get out. My brother fled with his friends to the Russian side. They were asked to join the army, the Polish army, within a Russian unit, and eventually was killed in the Battle of Stalingrad. So my father, my mother, and my grandmother, we got on the last train. The train just took us to Lublin, and that's where everyone was thrown out, and that's where we landed up. And we were taken to a part of the town which became the Lublin ghetto.
It wasn't possible to survive in Poland as a Jewish person without relying on somebody else. So Kitty's mother, in a time of crisis, what does she do? She starts teaching English to people. In doing that, she creates a relationship with the priest.
The priest told my mother, if you come to a point where there's no way out, just come and I'll see what I can do.
The priest then is able to help and puts his life on the line to provide them documents to get them out.
We had to part from my father. The priest said no way could we survive, all three of us together. My father was to go and work in this sawmill somewhere, we didn't know where, and my mother and I, we were to go into the center of Lublin. Why? Because they were rounding up the Polish population as well. And when they sorted them out, they took them to work in factories in Germany. And the priest said, that's what we've got to do. We've got to get out of the country and mix with this transport and get into Germany. And they actually checked documents, but our documents were in order, you see. And before my mother and I collected our thoughts, we were in a train and landed up far, far inside Germany.
It was very difficult for Jews to be able to hide within the Polish population because just small cultural and linguistic things such as accents could creep in and change the perception of you as being truly a Polish citizen.
Well, what happened was, because they suspected us, one of them reported us to the authorities. And that was our downfall.
Kitty was arrested for illegal entry into Germany as Leokadia Dobrzynska and sent for interrogation. The Nazis wanted to know the source of their false documents.
The irony of the Nazis was they could create death camps and murder Jews with impunity, but if somebody broke a law, they had to go through the penal system, which was complete nonsense because they could have simply deported them to Auschwitz as Jews. But because the legal system didn't allow it, they eventually were deported to Auschwitz with a death penalty for immigration charges.
So we were told we were going to be executed by firing squad. It was a brick wall, and we had to face the wall with our arms up like that, standing facing the wall. And then there was a huge explosion. And I thought, God, I haven't been hit. There was a great laughter. They said, oh no, we're not going to kill you. What's going to happen? We're going to commute your death sentence to life imprisonment in Auschwitz, and we're going to hand you over to the camp. They'll find out where these documents came from. So we were in a train that was specially converted to transport prisoners. And we traveled 48 hours standing before we arrived in Auschwitz. Well, we had absolutely no idea where we were. It was dark.
What did you first see when you got off the train?
Well, the thing opened up, and you heard an awful lot of noise.
Were you scared?
Well, we were scared of the dogs,
Yeah.
and then the great big women with whips, and they were whipping everyone and urging everyone to run, 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 everything at a running pace. Suddenly, there was a weird kind of stench, and the closer we got, the worse the stench became. And my mother said, what a curious place there. Can you smell? Can you smell roasting meat? I said, yes, I can. She said, do you think they're roasting chickens here this time of the night? I said, I don't know.
Kitty and her mother were sent to Birkenau, the largest of the 44 camps in the Auschwitz system, where they were processed and sent to quarantine.
When did you first stay in a wooden barrack?
Well, this was the quarantine, okay? So the first night we were pushed into here.
Did you find somewhere to sleep?
Well, we squeezed in somewhere here. I was incredibly cold that night because we were 48 hours without food, and I slept all night next to a woman. And she started speaking to me in German. It turned out she was a German gypsy.
Right.
During the early morning, while she was talking to me, she looked at my hand. She took my hand, she said, give me your hand. And she said, you know, you're going to come out. And the next thing that happened, whistles blew suddenly. It was still dark. And everybody was saying, rouse, rouse, out. And because this was quarantine, we didn't know.
Yeah.
And I shook this woman. you know?
Yeah.
And she didn't move. And I said to my mother, she's cold, she's dead. And I said, you know, you're cold, I'm cold. We need to strip her, and we need to have everything she's got.
Yeah.
Surviving Auschwitz was virtually impossible. And there was certainly no way you can say, if you did this, then this would happen. It was a matter of luck and chance and being in the right place at the right time. But there were some circumstances and some strategies that kind of worked.
That came to me that night, that actually that's the way to do it. That if you do have the people that had died, you've got to take everything off them. Because it was not good to them, was it?
You had to do what you needed to do to survive, and if that was taken from the dead, that's what it meant.
Not in the history of mankind has there been industrial killing on this scale. If something happened once, there's absolutely no reason why it can't happen again.
In 1943, Kitty was assigned to work on a new rail line into Birkenau called the Ramp. In 1944, she watched as transports of Jews from Hungary started to arrive.
What was the importance of the ramp?
People arrived in cattle trucks, and sometimes 7 or 10 trains would arrive in say, 24 hours. And people were sealed in, almost airtight, just a little bit of air coming through the slats. Sometimes the trains were sealed here for hours before they were allowed to unload.
Did people die in the trains?
Yeah, a lot of people died before they arrived here. Some people travelled 7 days before they arrived here.
Did anyone have any idea what was happening when they got off the train?
People had not the foggiest idea what was going to happen. Of course, there were people coming from the ghettos, so they didn't expect anything, you know, good, obviously. Everything was very nice and quiet because they didn't want people to panic. So loudspeakers were here telling people, well, there's a lot of typhus here, and so you're all going to be disinfected, and we've got to split. We went from women and women with children. Leave your luggage, you're going to get your luggage later. And then someone came, right, left, men this way, women with children on one side. Younger people are younger, you can go that way. Oh, you're older, you take your child with you, it'll be fine. You take your child, we're not going to split you up.
It was shocking to see that you stood in the exact same place as those people did once.
At the ramp, women with children and the elderly were sent directly to their death. And if you were young and able-bodied, and if at that period of time they needed workers, then you were chosen for slave labor, which essentially meant that you were chosen to die slowly, not to die immediately in the gas chambers.
Let me tell you, at this point, families were split, never ever saw one another again. So some of the men were taken this way, okay. Some of the girls that were selected to go into the camp were taken through there. You were just told to go that way. And you know the road there, where does that go?
The gas chambers.
That's it.
What happened when you arrived at camp?
Well, we were taken to a building like this, which we didn't know what it was, but it was called the sauna, not like you and I understand it, a processing place. And the first thing that happened to you, you were stripped, everything was taken from you, you were smeared with a green fluid, your hair was shaved everywhere.
That was then packaged and shipped off for processing. Hair was used both to create cloth and to line submarines and as detonators.
And then you were tattooed, and believe you me, that was when you felt you were no longer the same person.
When that tattoo was placed on your arm, you weren't what your parents had given you as your name, you became that number, and that was your identification completely taken away.
Not only is it a disgusting thing to do to human beings, but that's my grandma, and they wanted to turn her into an animal.
Without your hair and without your clothing, you lose something very distinctive about you. And there are people who remember at that point that they looked ridiculous.
It was hard to imagine how she survived. Every corner she turned, there was something trying to stop her from living.
First of all, survival depended on the place of work. If you were working outside, and the commandos, which are work parties, you hadn't had a prayer to survive for long. The other thing you couldn't survive was without a pair of shoes. Well, the problem was that you were issued wooden clogs. Your clogs would get stuck in the mud, your feet would rub, they would get infected, and you were dead. If you didn't have your bowl, you were dead, because nobody would give you their bowl. So survival depended on if you could not think about anything, just have a tunnel vision and think like an animal. Just picture yourself, what does an animal do? What does an animal need? Well, it doesn't need very much just to live, but the first thing it needs to get away from the predators, get away from all these people that are trying to kill you.
There were capos who were prison foremen, and they became more cruel than the German masters themselves.
Well, how do you get away from these people? Any of the ruling princes could come up to you and kill you.
And consequently, you couldn't figure out a strategy for survival. At Auschwitz, there was no why. It was done by whim.
Did you know that the wooden sheds were actually meant for 52 horses? And so they put these bunk things up there.
And there were 1,000 people in there.
And 1,000 people inside, that's right.
What happened the first thing in the morning when you woke up?
You were woken up with the sound of whistles, roughly around about 4 in the morning. So roll calls took place twice a day, and roll calls was one of the greatest terrors of the camp. Whistles blew, and everybody now screams, out, 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 schnell, raus, raus. Total chaos. 1,000 people had to rush out of this door. And you see the ground, you're looking at grass, well, you must look at mud. The whole thing was just one sea of mud. I've always said, if you found a blade of grass, what would you do with it? You'd eat it. So people were just staggering around the mud, but of course you had to stand to attention.
Selection didn't just take place on arrival at Auschwitz, it was a daily occurrence. In fact, any time that prisoners were together, if anybody at any point in time tipped over into that place where they were no longer useful to the Nazis, they could simply be selected and sent into the gas chamber.
People just collapsed and died.
Yeah.
Died of tiredness, of exhaustion, of shock.
Did you ever have to collect the corpses after roll call?
Yes,
You
yes.
had to do it.
Oh, yes. When I was in the Leichenkommando, this is what we did. Well, I don't know if people realize, but when you are hungry, hunger is a total obsession. You're just thinking, hunger, hunger, I must have something to eat. I must. If I don't eat something, I'll die.
It depended where you were in line as to how much nutrition you got. If you were at the beginning of the line, you got pure water. If you were at the end of the line, you had a problem because they might run out of food. And if you knew the person who was ladling out the food, then in one sense, they dug deep and they got the stuff in the soup that landed at the bottom, whether it's a potato or a carrot or something.
Hunger is the worst thing that anybody can experience, I think.
Did you stay in a bunk like this then?
If you were lucky, there was a one straw mattress and
Right.
one blanket for 8 people. How did 8 people sleep here?
Like sardines next
That's
to each
it,
other?
you've got it.
Yeah.
Head to feet, so you had somebody's feet in your face.
Yeah. Did people die in the night then? Did you have any
Yes,
experience
people
with
died
that?
in the night, that's right.
If somebody died next to you, all of a sudden you found your own body heat going out. You needed the warmth of the other body in order to stay, I wouldn't say warm, but to stay less cold during the frigid nights.
Suppose you needed to go to the toilet at night.
There's no toilets in here.
Well, A, there are no toilets. B, you were not allowed out.
The barracks had buckets. Now, a veteran prisoner would try to judge when to go to the bathroom at night by such a way as listening very carefully to what happened to the prisoner before you, to make sure that you weren't the last to fill the bucket, because if you were last to fill the bucket, you had to take it out and empty it.
You look at that. You see what this is?
It's mud.
That's just mud.
Yeah.
That's right. And very often there was a mess here as well.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't get to the bucket.
Right.
You had the permission to, even during the night, to use the bucket. So those were your living quarters.
It was just so horrific to think that anybody could stuff all these people in this tiny space. I have a place to go to the toilet, and I have a place to sleep, and I have a place to have food, and I know that I will get it. The Nazis made sure in every way possible you didn't get what you needed.
Something to eat, somewhere to sleep, and I'm afraid, if you don't mind the language, somewhere to shit. Now, what I'm going to show you is the latrines, okay? Now, you see that entrance? Mm-hmm. Thousands had to get through this entrance. And, of course, there was a functionary prisoner in charge and wouldn't let you in. But did you know, I worked there at one stage, so let's just show you what it was like.
How did you get the job to work here?
Well, I had to buy myself to work. I thought it'd be a good place. At least I'd have access to the lavatory.
Yeah.
And it was horrible.
There's nothing further from what a 16-year-old girl would want to be doing with her life than having her arms in shit. And yet, for her, that was a privilege. Because when she was in the Scheisskommando, it meant that she wasn't digging a ditch. She didn't have somebody flogging her to death because she couldn't dig fast enough. She wasn't actually freezing to death because she was inside. And what's more, the Nazis were nowhere near that place. So being in the Scheisskommando was a 16-year-old's dream in Auschwitz.
So that was an open sewer. Thousands of women going in there. You had like 2 or 3 people to a hole because you didn't have it to yourself. And then, when people were finishing, you had to dig all that stuff out. So everything had to come out.
Think of the idea that you have 35,000 people using these latrines. So it was designed again to dehumanize the people, to degrade them, to make them live in their own filth. Why do you dehumanize these people if you're going to kill them anyhow? Because if people look like a lump of feces, then it's easy to flush it down the toilet.
And what would happen if you couldn't get in? How would you go to the toilet?
You had your bowl,
Yeah.
and your bowl was virtually your food or your toilet.
Yeah.
The problem was washing it out, right?
Yeah.
How did you
No
wash it
water.
out? No water. In the winter, you
Yeah.
had snow, you could wipe it out. In the summer, it wasn't so. And you couldn't do anything on the ground because if somebody'd pick it, see you,
You can get in trouble.
well, never mind in trouble, you'd get killed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Full stop. We haven't got the words to describe the intense cold. Well, I always think of penguins, actually. How did penguins survive on the Antarctic? Well, if you look at them, they huddle together and try to have body heat from each other. Well, that's exactly what it was. So that was trying to overcome the cold.
It must have been horrific to have to stand still in the cold with no shoes, hours and hours on end, when she was hungry, starving, tired, and there was nothing she could do about that.
During a selection, there was most feared, because there you knew, at random, you could be selected to die. So fear, that was the greatest fear, selections.
What's this block here with the
Well,
bar?
this is called Block 25. You see the number here, and you see the bars on the windows?
Yeah.
Well, that's the only block that had the bars. It's called the death block.
Block 25 was the place where inmates, once they had been selected, were sent to await death. The Nazis, of course, because they were operating the camp as efficiently as possible, wouldn't simply select 2 or 3 inmates and then send them to the gas chamber because it wasn't worth turning the gas chamber on. So what would happen is they would collect several hundred of these prisoners who were at the end of their usefulness and then dispatch them to the gas chamber when it was convenient.
I'm going to explain to you what's inside here. Now,
Okay.
everybody kept away from here because when selections were taking place in all these blocks, people would have to undress and turn around in front of the SS doctor. And if
Yeah.
he didn't like your skin, or if you were too thin, or if you couldn't walk, they would take a mark and mark up your number.
Did anyone survive that went in there?
No, nobody survived.
Once you were in, you were dead.
You could never get anyone out. Once they were here, that was the end.
You were very taken aback by it. Kitty told me that they had no clothes and you could see that their hands were through the window begging for food or water or anything.
The reason Block 25 has such a prominent place in her memory is, of course, because all of the inmates in the women's camp could see it. It was right alongside their own barracks. They could hear the desperation of the women that were in there, knowing that there was literally no way out.
Of course, everybody kept away from me, and when they opened up the doors,
It smelled.
the stench went right through the camp. Well, language was a big problem because the camp had its own language, and it was actually a combined German and Polish sort of slang. For instance, the woman who was in charge of the block was called the Stubenälteste. So if you didn't know the German word, you wouldn't have known what it was. Her helpers were called Stubowa. Stube is a room in German, but it was kind of made into Polish. It was a slang that you had to understand, and that was a problem with the Greeks, the Italians, the Hungarians. They just couldn't understand. If you didn't, again, you couldn't survive. I lost my friends all the time. And that was the worst of it, that you had your friends, you established a contact, you already had someone that was, had access, and you could get this, and you could get that, and you could get a bit of food. And then, all of a sudden, they were gone.
Just having somebody that you knew that could help you in a given moment in time could be the difference between life and death.
Everybody needed the friendship or the sense of I need you to be able to mediate a situation that wasn't designed to allow you to live.
What were the white things on these fences?
Now, if you look at these white things, that's high-tension electric fencing. You are very, very cautious not to go too close, because if you did, you committed suicide.
People commit suicide often.
That was the easiest way out. You just touched the fence and you were dead. And if you touched this person, you were dead as well, because electricity would pass through your body to the next person. Or you were shot from the watchtowers if you came too close. So yes, people went on the fence, yes. There was one universal word which was called organizing, and that meant to getting hold of. Didn't matter what it was, whether you bought it, whether it was stolen, whether you found it, it was all one word, and it was called organizing. I organized some bread, I organized a pair of shoes, I organized something to wear. So what did women do? They always tried to get 2 or 3 together. 4 was the best. One working in one place, one working perhaps had access to the toilet, like I did at one time. One had access to water. One perhaps had access to some clothes, to the sauna. And that's how you exchanged. And that was the mutual support that was absolutely vital to survival. If you didn't have that, you couldn't survive. We're going to Block 12, because all that was part of sick bay.
Did you come here a lot then?
I tried to hide there just to conserve my energy. My mother sometimes would hide me somewhere.
Kitty's mother was a very highly educated and cultured woman. Once she got into the Holocaust, her knowledge of German was going to be really important to her. She had both the physical attributes and the mental attributes to be able to work her way through very difficult circumstances.
And my mother worked right throughout the time. She was working there. She was supposed to be a nurse, but of course you couldn't nurse anyone. My mother psychologically tried to keep people alive by simply begging them to live another day.
Working in the hospital meant that her mother was able to help Kitty Between the two of them, they could work together to enable just increasing the chances of survival a little.
My mother was working in an infirmary, an infectious block. So when I had typhus, I was on my mother's block. And I was lucky enough to be told I'll be able to stay and work within within the infirmary. So I was a glorified cleaner, but really my function was to bring the bodies out that died. People died during the night. Some of the bodies were up there. So two of us had to climb up there and get the corpses down, drag them all the way and stack them up outside. And I actually hid some of my friends here. I managed to bring them in here because I had access, but I told them it was the most dangerous place to be because nearly every day the SS doctors would come in and carry out selections. They would sit people up. Sometimes they had to jump. If they couldn't jump over this heating channel, they'd be killed. Of course, the sick couldn't get down, so the SS doctors would just, with a chalk, mark up a bunk. Well, of course, we know what happened. Dr. Mengele came and said, today we're emptying this block, which meant today they're all going to die.
Did they know what was happening?
Well, they already knew what was happening, so we had to stand like this, in a circle, holding. And that's when I lost most of my friends. And that broke me. I never got over that. My mother realized what was going on, and from somewhere she appeared and she just grabbed me and pulled me away. And at that point, we thought, well, what's going to happen next? It's all empty. They were gone, and I was on my own.
There was a place called Canada, named after the country Canada, which was the place in which they confiscated all of the valuables, they sorted it, they inventoried it, they then shipped it back to Germany for use.
They came and said, we're going to ask you to join the Canada. My mother said, there'll be food there. You must do it. There will be food. You'll find it among the clothes. Yeah. And so I said, yes, okay. And that's how I got to the Canada. I'm going to tell you why I've brought you here. Thousands upon thousands of people were brought in with all their belongings.
Yeah.
Kitty really wanted to tell the story of Canada. For her, it's about evidence. Each one of those suitcases belonged to a human being, and each one of those coats was worn by one of those human beings. What she's trying to get across to us, I think, is just the scale of the killing based on the scale of that site.
So there were 30 sheds here, all full of people's belongings, and we were here to do the sorting of the belongings.
How long were you working here for?
I was here 8 months. There were 2 pathways. Yeah. That pathway at the bottom had a huge heap, like 3-story high. Everybody's things jumbled up. All the suitcases were emptied there, documents, children's clothes, prams, everything was jumbled up down the bottom there. And then it was taken to individual sheds, and there it was sorted. My particular job was sorting nothing but men's jackets. So I had to find these men's jackets, and I couldn't always find them because I had a certain quota that I had to make.
What happened if you didn't make the quota?
Oh, you got punished if you didn't make the quota. And in the shed was a long table, like a trestle, and you put the jackets on the trestle, and you opened up all the seams. What do you think was in these jackets?
Lots of jewellery and...
Lots of jewellery, diamonds, jewellery, money of all different denominations.
Did you always give everything in, or did you sometimes hide it and then...
If you kept one single item of any value, that was the end, because it was constant inspection, so you couldn't keep it. And we found a lot of paper money, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
What do you think we did with this paper money? Because it wasn't any good to you. You couldn't buy anything. What did we do with it?
use it as insulation?
No, we use it
Toilet
as
paper.
toilet paper.
Toilet paper.
Yeah, well.
All kind dollars, kroners, whatever currency there was used as toilet paper. One of the SS who took us to the Canada made a speech, and he said, because you're here, you're never going to be back in the main camp, because what you see, we cannot allow it. There's only one way out of here, and that's through the chimney.
What is this place?
Well, you see these ruins, that's all we can see. That was known as the White House. This was a place where the Sonderkommando, the people who were working inside the gas chambers, they were working here. We were not supposed to be here. You see where the sauna is? That's how close we are to the sauna, but we're not allowed to come here. However, on about 4 or 5 occasions, I managed to pass this place, and the circumstances were that we took some clothes in hand carts, and we were told to take those hand carts back to the main camp. Now, the SS woman that accompanied us, she didn't like going in between the fences because she was afraid that she was going to get electrocuted. So she decided to take us this way. So what happens, we walked along here and we passed this place here, which was a White House. People were lined up. Mostly men were lined up here, all a line of men. Each one was sort of going in as you were passing by, and you could hear a shot. And we were told by the men, by the Sonderkommando, being shot in the neck.
Could you just hear it, or could you see it?
You could hear the shot, yes, you could hear a shot. Now, the other thing is that she said, you mustn't look around, you walk and you keep your head down. But we did see, so what did we see? We saw some men throwing in bodies into pits, and smoke coming out and fire coming out of the pits, and those were some of the bodies that they couldn't burn in the ovens. They were bringing them in here and burning them in pits. So this is a pit there where you're seeing all this vegetation. And I actually found one pit some years ago and found human remains, and I think it was that pit over there. And I passed this about 4 or 5 times within the 8 months that I was working here.
How did it make you feel when you passed?
It was a horrific sight. And we didn't even want to look. But of course we did, you know, it was forbidden. But it was just horrific because you were just seeing bodies being burnt and the fire coming out of the pits and smoke all over the place. There were several, we passed several pits. There was one here, there was another one down there. But there were many pits here, but I recall that one particularly, very close to the sauna. This is where people died. The killing part of Auschwitz. I know you can't see anything. Everything was burnt in that area to erase all traces of murder.
In 1944, 5 gas chambers were working at full capacity. Kitty Hart Moxon was placed in the Canada section at Auschwitz-Birkenau, right alongside crematorium number 4, where Jews were being gassed every day.
Right at the back of the fence was the gas chamber and crematorium number 4.
Right.
And we had a direct view into that gas chamber. See this wood there?
Yeah.
That's where groups of people were sitting. Small children running around. They had no idea what was going to happen.
They were herded into the crematoria. There was an undressing room. And people were told, remember where you hung your clothes because you're going to get it back.
We had no contact because we were behind the wire, and also it was very dangerous. You were not allowed to communicate.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have helped.
No.
If you would have told these people when you know you're going to die, is that the help?
No.
It isn't. We felt it's better they don't know.
And as they were herded into the gas chamber was sealed.
One of the SS personnel would put on a gas mask, and he would climb up on a ladder with a tin in his hand, and he would throw in some powder. That was a gas. And then, all of a sudden, you just had the scream. The crematorium gas chamber was a huge, thick walls. You could hear the people actually suffocating there and screaming. And eventually, after 20 minutes, it was quiet.
The Sonderkommando who worked in the gas chamber reported that people climbed up on top of each other, and they sort of were in a sculptural pyramid. The gas was evacuated, and then they were taken to the ovens, and there was a dissecting table. They opened them up to make sure that people did not die with something valuable inside themselves. What Birkenau essentially did was to reduce the human being to a consumable byproduct of the killing process.
And the very next thing you saw was the men with wheelbarrows taking ash and dumping it in the pond at the back. Do you think I could actually believe it?
No. Did you and your friends talk about it, what you saw?
We tried not to talk about it. We knew it was happening, but, you know, we decided we mustn't talk about it. Don't look, don't look.
Yeah.
We know it's going on, but don't look at it.
Little did the Nazis know that for months, Jewish prisoners that had been forced to operate the crematorium were planning an insurrection. On October 7, 1944, Kitty was witness to the uprising that day.
There was just a loud noise. And when this noise happened, we thought that was it. My friends and I, we threw ourselves down, just like that, cover our heads, lie flat on the ground.
Armed resistance was not a decision whether to live, but most often a decision how to die.
We do know that there were resistant movements. The Poles had the resistance movement, the Jews had the resistance movement, but we never knew who these people were because it was so incredibly dangerous.
We didn't know it was uprising until we saw the men actually come over. They seemed to have cut part of the fencing, because that was electrified fence.
Yeah.
So they seemed to have cut the fence and run over, and they tried to escape somewhere. Yeah, I don't know where, but they were running all over. And we were just lying down, spread-eagled, because that was the safest thing to do. There was a general shootout. They came in on motorcycles with machine guns, and I think they got most of the men.
Kitty was also a witness to the fact that Jews did not go like lambs to the slaughter, that they were thinking about what they could do to overcome the Nazis, and with absolutely no chance whatsoever to get hold of the explosives, to be able to overcome the tight strictures on them. These Jewish people did that.
Following the uprising was a huge inquiry, like a whole roll call with an inquiry. And during that inquiry, one of the SS women came and called my number, 39934. And I was transferred back to the main camp. And I had no idea why. I found out later it was my mother who managed to speak to one of the commandants and told him I'd been working 8 months there and that she was being evacuated, and asked him if I could be evacuated. And that's what happened.
So why do you think that he let you go?
We don't know. We don't know. I think my mother spoke this perfect German, and she didn't beg, she didn't crawl. She just got up there and spoke, asked to speak to him in a proper manner, and I think he took it on board and called my number.
Well, I was transferred to the main camp. We were on this list to be evacuated, and my mother looked around and she thought, oh my goodness, we are all with these functionary prisoners. I wonder if they'll kill us. And we were put into a cattle truck. And my mother made a speech. Just remember, we are leaving here. We are all equal from now on. We will no longer have your functions. And remember, we may need one another's help. So, from now on, you're all going to be friends. And that's what happened.
After leaving Auschwitz-Birkenau in November 1944, Kitty and her mother went through a further 6 camps and several death marches before finally being liberated in Salzwedel, Germany, April 14th, 1945.
Liberation was at best bittersweet. It meant that for the first time they had to confront loss. Loss of parents, loss of spouses, loss of children, loss of entire communities, loss of entire worlds. And for years they had guarded themselves from feeling anything, and once they felt the feeling of vacuum, of emptiness, sometimes shattered them.
You tried not to be emotional about anything. If you did, your emotions would just take over and you couldn't go on.
That a civilized nation would take people on a train, bring them to gassing, annihilate them, confiscate and recycle the elements of their body, and do that systematically day in, day out. It's inconceivable. How could this happen?
I felt very ashamed at the world and very just upset that this could ever take place.
Some people see it as just a time in history, but they don't understand how it relates to us today.
We are the ultimate proof of her survival. If she hadn't found the hope to keep on going, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Now, what I want to show you is, what's this water? It's incredibly important to tell you about this water. Women, men, children, all, that's their final resting place. Just as a cemetery.
Kitty Heltmarkson is saying, I was here, this is what they did to me, this is how it was set up, but I prevailed.
There are people that simply don't believe that this place existed. We know it happened to the Jews, but the Jews went the first and they went the last, so who's going to be next?